Right, go.
Well, a very good day to you. I'm Michael Taylor. I'm delighted to be working with Quest Media on the whole issue of how Tameside can emerge better from COVID-19. We launched a campaign last week in the newspapers, on Tameside FM, on in the Tameside Reporter, the Oldham Reporter, the Glossop Chronicle, and the purpose of it is we are open. That Tameside's open for business. We want to support businesses in the region which have been impacted by lockdown, as every business inevitably has been over the last 3 months. And joining me over the technology platform Zoom is Councillor Oliver Ryan from Tameside Borough Council. We're going to have a conversation. We've had a few questions submitted from members of the public, your voters, Oliver, and we just want to explain how Quest can work with the local authority, how local businesses can get involved in this campaign, and what sort of things that we're all active in to support business in Tameside. So, welcome, Oliver, Councillor Ryan.
Hi, Michael.
So, how's lockdown been for you? How have you been able to do your job in these?
It's been extraordinarily busy. So we're very busy when we're in the office anyway, but I suppose that time between, maybe going making a brew or reading some documents before a meeting or whatever, you're now having to sort of do that in the evenings and book in time to make brews and leave the laptop. So there have been some days where I've not left this computer and this desk. And I think because of the nature of the work that we're in now and the sort of digital world that we live in, it's quite intensive mentally and physically, and I'm sure a lot of people have found that, but yeah, busy, I think is the main.
Yeah, just to be absolutely clear, let's assume that not everybody knows the difference between council officials and politicians. You're an elected politician. You represent a ward in, what's your ward?
Audenshaw.
Audenshaw, that's right, yeah. So you've got obviously a few thousand people there who you're accountable to. A lot of councillors, obviously you don't do this job full time. It's not a job as such, but for you, you're what's called an executive member. Could you explain what that means and what your portfolio, as it's called, what it involves and what your days are like?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So I'm a ward councillor for Audenshaw, which is God's own country, the closest bit of Tameside to Manchester, and I represent about 13,000 people. It's the second biggest ward in the borough. I was elected in 2014 for the first time, re-elected in 2018. I was previously the executive member for Children's Services, and I'm now the executive member for Finance and Economic Growth, which is a new brief that we put together last year. My brief kind of looks at not only the finance directorate and how the council manages its finances and its budget, its reserves and council tax and everything else that goes with that, all the things that you'd imagine a sort of chancellor of the exchequer to do, if you like, for a borough-sized council. But I also have the growth directorate under my portfolio as well. So it means that when we're talking about businesses and economic growth and how we can help the borough through post-COVID, that's all under my remit as well. So they're two quite large parts of the council, but I think they're two really important parts of the council, and I've sort of relished getting my teeth into it this year. But you're absolutely right. There is a total difference between councillors and officers in that councillors are elected by the public to go and give a view on the world, politically speaking. Council officers are specialists that are employed by the council to get into those roles, get into those positions, and make sure that we administer the borough through the rules of sort of good governance and proper specialism.
Right. So what are the state of local government finances? We're going to be talking through the course of our conversation today about what Tameside can do for local business. But I think it's probably worth having a bit of a reality check that obviously the whole impact of this global pandemic that it's affected lots of people in different ways, lots of organisations in different ways, not least local government. You've been asked to do a lot in a period of lockdown. You've had to continue to presumably pay everybody. So what particular pressure points have hit local government finance in this period, just so we can get a proper sense of the issues that you're dealing with before we can even come on to what's realistic for you to be able to work with business on?
Of course. So Tameside as a whole sort of health economy, is merged with not only the CCG in terms of our governance, the clinical commissioning group, but also the hospital. So by the time you've dealt with the whole finances that the council has some kind of influence on, you're talking sort of £950 million, give or take. And obviously a small chunk of that is the council. We've had 10 years of massive austerity. So in terms of revenue spend, we've had about £155 million cut away from what we previously had. And we've seen more cuts sort of from the past few years through that isn't covered by council tax. COVID has presented a really big problem for us, to be honest. I mean, if you were to ask what the state of council finances are across the country, I think it's fairly dire. I mean, I said recently that if we don't get more help from government to tackle COVID and the cost of COVID, we could well be in a position where we find ourselves, clapping those people that have been doing care work and health work and really important things to keep our society moving at this time of like national pandemic, and then on the Monday having to assess whether we can still afford to keep their job. And that's the sort of sad reality of this, really, which is that we've had huge costs that have come out of COVID for the council, not only in terms of loss of income, but in terms of extra payments that we've had to make to just keep things ticking in our communities, that have basically meant that this year we're going to see an in-year bulge of what we're going to have to make. So that would probably be around £7 million extra this year of what we're going to have to find. That will then jump next year to about £48 million extra, which is about a good third of council revenue. And I think if we were to look at that situation as it stands, you'd basically be saying, the council won't be able to exist in the form that it is in a year's time if that's the reality of what we have to deal with. So the government have given us about £13 million to try and help us with some of that. But I think what we've been trying to say is that government said at the start of this whole crisis that we will help councils with the cost of COVID. We will cover the cost of COVID. We won't make sure that your communities are out of pocket to get through this. And the reality is that we're now going to end up with a huge gap in our finances on account of this pandemic, which isn't only a thing for the council, jobs for the council, it's real impacts on our communities and services for them as well. So it's a massive question. It's the hot topic at the moment. And I hope that when we have this emergency budget in July, the government takes some account of that. But it's a difficult situation.
What headroom have you got for raising things like business rates and council tax? I mean, it's going to be tough anyway if people are losing their jobs. People, there'll be people who have exemptions from paying council tax.
Of course.
So where's your headroom for actually raising any revenue over and above what the government can grant to you?
We don't have an awful lot of it. I mean, people will know in Tameside that because of the way our council tax base works, if you put 1% on council tax in Tameside, you'll raise about 700k. If you put 1% on council tax in Westminster, or you put 1% on council tax in Trafford, you'll make a couple of million quid. This is the sort of perversity of local government finance, is that poorer areas that need more finance to be able to continue with services for the most vulnerable aren't financed in the right way, so can't raise the amount of money that they need, and so have to end up asking their residents to contribute more. So we don't have an awful lot of headroom actually in that context for either payment on that, but we are aware that people through this period also won't be able to pay things like council tax and business rates in some circumstances, and if they're in that circumstance, they should get in touch with the council and have a conversation with us about what we can do to support them. So we realise it's a difficult time. It isn't all about the council, it's about how we can support our communities as well. We are one part of that whole Tameside family, and we've got to make sure that whatever we do it with them in mind. But ultimately, it's a question of finances means that in a year's time, if we have this conversation again, I could well be sat in front of you saying, we haven't got any more support from government. We didn't get any support in terms of the cost of COVID. We're now having to cut, X many jobs from the back of this. And that's the reality of it, which will mean services being shut down, which nobody wants to do.
Yeah, right. Let's talk a little bit more then, Councillor, about the economic growth element of your portfolio. It's important for Quest because of the We Are Open campaign. So you were very generous in your support for it. I saw the statement that you did about how important it was that local businesses are the lifeline. What's your motivation for supporting a campaign such as this, and how do you perceive local businesses can return to the new normal that could see more of them gradually opening as they seem to be doing at the moment?
Of course. I absolutely praise Quest, I think, for trying to lead on this issue at this time. So the council is obviously a part of that, as I talked about before, this kind of whole Tameside approach. But for someone, an organisation like Quest, to really take on that mantle and say, we're going to help get some of these businesses open through this We Are Open campaign, which has been massively successful, I think they should be applauded in that hugely for the extra work they've put in. And I really hope that businesses engage with them and then in turn engage with us about what we can do to help them. I suppose the motivation for me is that businesses and residents and shoppers and everybody that's involved in that kind of sphere in our town centres, everybody has a responsibility to make sure that we can not only get back to normal, but that we can do it safely. I think back to normal is probably the wrong phrase, actually, because I don't think we'll be back to normal for the foreseeable. But I think we all have a responsibility to make sure that whatever we do it in a safe and responsible way, but that we support our business where we can. So if you can maybe go and shop, but you don't necessarily shop at a peak time, or you won't hang around a certain shopping centre, you might get bits you need and then head on to somewhere else so other people can move in. These are responsible things that we can take, steps that we can take. Make sure that you wear masks, making sure that shops have proper protocols in place. These are all things that will enable us to get back to some form of flexibility and movement sooner to help businesses get back, and ultimately for the success of our town centres and our economy, which is a massively important part of Tameside. I mean, we aren't just a block on the edge of Manchester. We are an economy in our own right. We need to support the strength of our local economy, and getting people back out, using those services, buying those goods is a really important part of that. So anything we can do to support that, I think, is really important, but the responsibility is on all of us.
Okay, let's go through then a few different things that the council can do for local business and for local people who are tuning into this conversation. I guess the first one is a run through the different sort of programs of support that people have got access to, that are available to business in Tameside, that your officers are involved in.
Yep, so we've had the discretionary grant, which is currently available. The first tranche of that actually closes at 5 o'clock today, just checking the clock. So if people haven't applied already, and I imagine this will probably go out tomorrow, actually, they should probably apply, or should have applied on that timescale. That's set up in tranches and is about £2.3 million worth of funding for us to disseminate down to local businesses that need that support. And there'll be generally people that missed out on the first tranche of government funding a couple of weeks back. So perhaps they were in a business in a shared space and weren't responsible for their own business rates, or perhaps they were too small to qualify. But this is something that will help them bridge that gap. So those people that missed out the first round should apply for this round. When the first tranche closes, we'll then move to a round 2, which should be able to help charities and other local groups that we want to assess really for loss of income and current rental costs, to make sure that we help those people that are most in need. So that's currently available. Previously, it's been available. There was the Retail, Hospitality and Leisure Grant, and the first set of business support grants that went through the government, and we paid out something like £39.5 million worth of that grant. It was a huge payment for Tameside's economy, ranging from about 10,000, some that were at 25,000, for people that had different rateable values of anywhere under over 15,000. But what it meant was that you either got a £10,000 grant or £25,000 grant if you were slightly larger, which hopefully meant that you could pay your rent, pay your supply costs, pay for stock or whatever you had to pay for during that period, staff, to see you through the next few months. So that's been a really important part of that. I'm proud that we did it so well, and I think we were the best in GM at paying out. Something like 99% of those that were eligible ended up being paid in the end of that. So I think everybody that should have got paid, which is a really important part. So, but keep a look out on the website for Tameside support. There may be the things that come up when we get word from government. So
yeah, and what are the exceptions? What would someone seek support for that you wouldn't be able to apply for? Just to save people the bother of filling the forms in and contacting you if they're not eligible. What are the sort of the common things that people aren't allowed to claim against?
So if you're running a business from your home, perhaps, so all of your costs are associated with your rent or your mortgage, we can't help with that, unfortunately, at this stage, but there may be something at a later date. We don't know if government chooses to look at it. We don't run the furlough scheme, so I suppose that isn't something that you can do through the council. I suppose in those businesses where perhaps you work in cash and so can't evidence necessarily some of the payments that you've taken or the rents that you've made, it's really important that we have a paper trail to make sure that these payments are not fraudulent. We did have a bit of a hump in fraudulent claims in the first grant, which is really unfortunate, but we managed to get through those, and I think it was important that we did. But I think the key message is, even if you're not sure, make sure you get an application in so that you may be considered. And so even if the deadline passes, you can have a conversation about your application. It's always worth checking for the amount of money that's involved here. And I think, you know, there are a couple of circumstances that I've had people get in touch with me where, you know, perhaps they live in Tameside, but they run a business based in Glossop, or they run a business based in Manchester, and you'd have to then look at the business address as opposed to residential address. And these are some things that we can try and help iron out. But I think importantly, do apply, get the support that you need, because we want to see as many Tameside businesses as possible come out of this healthy and still able to trade and active and prosperous.
Yeah. Now, Tameside Council will have a certain amount of budget set aside for all sorts of services that local businesses will be invited to procure for. I noticed that some councils around the country have having quite a rigorous strategic approach to shopping local, and that they're procuring local. There's something people in your world, in local government circles, talk about, which is the Preston model, where all your services are procured just to local businesses in order to keep that wealth that the council and other institutions in that area can generate. What are you doing in Greater Manchester, either with neighbouring boroughs to support networks of businesses who can maybe do some works for the council? And what sort of examples would you have of people delivering services from private businesses?
So that's a really important point, actually. I think it's one that I think local government has probably been a little bit slow to the game on over the past few years, in that when we had the budgets we had 10 years ago, we probably should have looked at supporting local businesses more. I think we need to be probably honest about that. But I think what we've tried to do over the past few years is to help our own procurement methods to put a value and a social value on keeping local spend and keeping spend local. So there's something called a local multiplier effect. So if you give £1 to a local business, it adds something like £4 to the local economy in somewhere like Ashton, as opposed to if you bought in a service from elsewhere or used a multinational, you don't necessarily create that same amount of extra wealth for your economy. So it's a massively important point. It needs to be taken on board. We're part of an organisation called Cllr Procurement, which Tameside actually chairs this year, which is responsible for our procurement setup in Tameside when we're looking at buying in contracts or getting pieces of work done. A good example of this is we had some new cremators fitted to our crematorium in Tameside. It was quite a big project. It's not the most exciting thing for some people, but it's quite a big important part of what the council do. And that was a substantial contract that we managed to award to a local firm through putting extra onus on the fact that we wanted to keep something like this local and create a local effectiveness of spending this pound. So it's really important. Cllr do a lot of great work, not only in Tameside, but in Stockport and Trafford and elsewhere. And I think Rochdale. And I think it's important that we continue to buy into that, not only for this effect on local services, but actually for our own procurement methods, that it's really important that social value and local spend is a key part of any penny the council spends, which granted is not that much these days, but it's a really important part. Yeah.
But I guess if you're working across Trafford, Rochdale, Stockport and Tameside, that means that a business based in Hyde can go and do some work for Trafford Council that might be procured from them or from Rochdale Council. So it's not just about it's widening those opportunities as well, and making those opportunities to pitch to do some work for local authorities. You have to be the gateway to supporting businesses right across the borough, don't you?
100%, absolutely. I mean, the whole engine for growth that we've got at the council, which is really substantial. We've got something like 26 members of staff currently transferred over to growth at the moment to make sure that we can look at this post-COVID scenario. We've got to turn ourselves into a job-creating, business-supporting machine after the end of this, because we know it's going to be a really difficult time for the economy. We've all seen GDP figures. We know that local impact of that is better or worse dependent on what your economy is like. Places like Tameside don't have a more flexible work market that some places do, and so need to be supported in more of a better way. So we've been having conversations at GM through things like the Growth Board, which I sit on, and through business support hubs at GM to make sure that Tameside businesses are getting not only their fair share, but all the support that they need during this period. I think it's important that we've done everything that we possibly can to support businesses, because we know that it's a really, really difficult time. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, the amount of people that I've had call me up and talk about their own personal scenarios of their business, it's quite heartbreaking. These people have put their life and soul into some of these operations, and it's difficult then for them to be hit by something totally outside of their control and therefore not be able to operate or not be able to pay bills or staff that they've had on board for over time. So it's difficult, but we're doing everything that we can.
Okay, give us a snapshot of some of your casework then, both in your portfolio, but also as a, as you were saying, the member in Audenshaw.
So I have to be careful because there's like a confidentiality clause in councillors' kind of contracts. But so we've had a lot of issues. I don't know about the flooding last week and the lightning and things that we had. Right. That was a massive issue in my ward, rightly so. There were some roads that really needed some support to get their grids unblocked, and some other issues with gardens, and United Utilities needs to be spoken to. So I have had to do a bit of that correspondence. In terms of my exec support role, I think I've had an awful lot of businesses actually contact me personally. I've tried to make myself available everywhere I can on Facebook sites and support sites for businesses and other things. I've gone to briefings that we've had with local businesses. There is a weekly Tameside meeting every week with local businesses to sort of get their feel for how they feel about how we're responding to COVID. We've done conversations with local businesses to try and make them donate some stuff to our drive to be able to get some food to people in the borough and such. So I think in terms of my casework, I've had an awful lot of people contact me personally about their case. So it's usually a business of some kind that has either filled in a grant and wants conversation about the process or hasn't filled in a grant and wants conversation about what the eligibility criteria is. And I'm happy to take those calls, happy to help wherever I can. And happy to get the team to look into anything that we can do to support those people as well. So it's been heavier than normal, but I think that's probably due to the fact that we're living during a pandemic, and people need support in this time, and it's right that councillors and the council is there to support them in that, and we're trying to do our best.
Okay, so councillor, talk us through Business Clinic and how people can access that. Obviously, we'll put out any contact details, web addresses, phone numbers, so people don't necessarily have to pause and write this down. But just explain to us what people can expect from the Business Clinic that Tameside Council's setting up.
So that hopefully, if this goes through the right governance, and I had to have a look at this the other day, I don't think we've sort of formally launched the thing yet, but when it is launched, it's going to be hopefully a space where businesses can come and have a conversation about their health check for their operations in Tameside and get the support that they need, however we can offer that either at GM level or a Tameside level, to make sure that they're able to continue to operate. But people should visit www.tameside.gov.uk. There's a business support page. There is a safe Tameside page to help people continue to operate safely. And hopefully when this business clinic is open and operating, as we would hope if it goes through, then we will be able to say to people, that's the place to go to if you want any of these serious conversations about how you will continue to grow in Tameside, because your strength is our strength at the end of the day, and anything we can do to support you is good.
Yeah, and obviously that's something that at Quest, we're looking to do that. We've been contacted by people who've got great expertise as business advisors in their own right, who know how to help businesses through things like the furlough scheme and how to access all sorts of different loans. And, the pages of the newspaper and interviews on the radio station have had lots of that sort of thing as well.
100%, and it's actually really important as well that Quest, in what they've done, is listen to businesses in the same vein. So they have provided loads of really good advice, but I think they've also tried to listen and share sort of experiences of people during this as well, which I've certainly listened to. And the council is a listener, and I would hope that really Quest have helped in us doing that, to act as a bit of a conduit, I think, between the business community and myself and the wider Tameside community. So I think they've done well in that sense.
Good. So you spoke before about being a job creation machine, and about how you're having part of your portfolio, which is growth. Where can Tameside's economy grow from? And I know we're emerging out of COVID, but where are the hotspots, and what's the Tameside economy good at and good for, and got bursting with potential to do better at?
Okay, so we think that we've got a future in digital and in new industries and creating a sort of incubation space for small startups. So we have done that in Ashton and things like the old baths, and by bringing in dark fibre into those networks, we've managed to create a space that no other place in Greater Manchester has in terms of internet speeds. Not only that, but we're pretty good at what you would probably call like traditional industry as well. So we have some really good engineering companies here. We have some really good manufacturing companies here that make a range of things from sort of food products to really specialist types of engineering material, or everything from sort of paints and operation equipment. So we're really good at all of that. I suppose my query, I think, in Tameside is that where do we plan for 10 years time? And the council's job is to look for 10 years time and say, how do we make sure that we can support businesses in getting there and getting that support? So by offering ourselves as support for that, by offering Greater Manchester support for that, we hope that we can help people build a business plan to make sure that they're not only here in 10 years time, but that they've grown in 10 years time and that they've expanded into other parts of businesses that can be a bit more competitive. So I think there's always this challenge in Tameside, isn't there, that we can perhaps be seen as a sort of periphery bit of Manchester, or East Manchester, if you like, and it's not the case. We do have quite a strong economy in our own right, certainly through sort of Duckingfield and the Tame Valley area. Those big industrial estates, there's an awful lot of really good work going on there. I've taken every opportunity I can to go and learn from those people. I've visited a number of companies over the past year of being in this post, and I want to continue to do that, to hear really about how we can support them to make sure that Tameside is this machine and that Tameside as a borough is punching above its weight on a national and regional level. Sorry.
No, there's absolutely no doubt that that the area over the years has taken a few blows, and it's just about having that confidence and self-knowledge and being self-critical enough, I suppose, to recognise where our strengths are as an economy. I mean, when I heard you make the point about you want to be a digital hub, so does everyone. So what is it about Tameside that's going to be particularly different? I know you mentioned that, getting dark fibre into the Ashton baths. It's a great setup. I've been there myself. It's got a great buzz about it. Hopefully when we're out of lockdown and people are back working again, it'll be one of those places where people will want to have a sustainable business. But Manchester's full of places like that. You can't walk around without tripping over them. They appear on every corner practically. So what is it that's going to be special? And it can't just be about being a cheap location either, can it?
No, and I think this is probably a really councillor-y answer, but I've lived in Tameside all my life. I love Tameside to bits. I think there is a magic about the place, and there's certainly people that want to achieve and do more and aspire. And I think business owners are in the same way. In terms of actual practical reasons why Tameside is the best place to invest in Greater Manchester or further, I think there is something about the cost of doing business here. There's a really good thing about the skills that we have here and the really good skills base that we have in Tameside College and our sixth form colleges that have provided a really good base for how we can bring young people through into those industries. I think there's definitely something to be said about infrastructure and connectivity of Tameside. So not only do we have good connectivity to the motorway network and Manchester, but we're also quite well connected to things like the airport and the train stations. So we're in a good place to be able to look at how we can impact on the wider region. I think we do that already. But I think the key thing is for me is that Tameside is a place that I think has been had an under expectation on it for too long. And I think people look at Tameside and think, oh, well, we know what Tameside does. And actually, the fact of the matter is that we're a huge hive of activity that people can come and be a part of. And I think we're ready now to sort of rocket launch ourselves into the next phase of post-COVID. There's so much potential in Tameside that you don't get in other boroughs, frankly, because people have come and gone and done different things. And I think in Tameside, we're still waiting for our chance. And we know that to be able to prove ourselves. And I think we're going to do that through not only things like developing the sort of Ashton corridor along Ashton Moss and further into how we work into Manchester, but also looking at further afield into Ashton and our town centres to how do we make 21st century town centres that can compete with places like Manchester and Stockport and Oldham. And they're really important parts of the whole growth agenda, if you like. And it's an important part of supporting our businesses as well.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned town centres, and the government have set up a town centre task force. I know some of the people from the university that I work at, Manchester Met, who from the Institute of Place Management, who work with the government on that programme. And not unique to Tameside, but every district in the country faces the issue that, Amazon have knocked on my door 3 times today already. Granted, it's my son's buying things, but we're all getting into the habit now, and particularly it's been accelerated during lockdown. The way of getting goods into people's hands through opening up a piece of real estate in a place where people visit is declining in popularity. People are shopping online. There might be an opportunity to distribute from somewhere as well connected as Tameside, as you highlighted a few moments ago. But the future of our high streets, not unique to Ashton, Stalybridge, Mossley, or any of the other district strips, is some really challenging, existential, big problems. How can we do that? How does Hyde become the thriving centre of its community that it once was? It can't just be having a market and a high street, which at the moment is just seems to be takeaways. It needs to be something else. What can we have that can stimulate that, and what role can the local authority, the Tameside Borough Council, play in that transformation when there's big systemic issues going on globally?
Absolutely. So that is a massive question, and it's
I
what I know.
Sorry about
that. No, it's okay. I wouldn't expect anything else. It's a massive question, but I think it's one that every local authority is having to ask themselves. Every town is having to ask themselves, and it's right, because we've seen a drop in not only retail spend but footfall since 2008. I think since the crash, and we've seen that people, as you say, are not necessarily using high streets as much, or in the same way rather as they did previously. So I think the challenge for us is to say, if we have these town centres like Ashton, Stalybridge, Hyde, Denton, what are our sort of selling points for those areas? What's the unique thing that would bring me into Stalybridge or Hyde or Ashton? And I'm a young guy. I've lived in Tameside all my life, and I sort of think, I'd probably go to Ashton to shop. I'd probably go to Stalybridge for a drink. That these are sort of work on the culture and the idea of the place, which would draw people like me, my generation, into these town centres to be able to give them a sort of new lease of life. And I think the question for the council is, what can we do developmentally through place or planning to support some of that? So things like sightlines into train stations, connectivity is really important. Really good public spaces are another part of what we want to bring forward, perhaps residential in our town centres that we haven't seen before. I don't think there's necessarily a future for this sort of, blob of shopping centre in and outside in the middle of nowhere. There's definitely got to be something to be said about how we combine high quality residential connectivity as well as a shopping district and town centre. And places like Hyde have huge potential for that. We had a conversation earlier this year with about 100 different property professionals about Hyde specifically through One Public Estate programme. And they all saw huge potential in Hyde, dependent on what you could do around the town centre, the place in the town centre, how you can create a space where people feel like they can live there, shop there, and then go out there and then connect to places further afield. So there absolutely is a future for our town centres, and I think people do shop locally. But I think if we're not facing up to the fact, as you say, that the high street has changed and we've got to box cleverer in terms of what we offer for our towns, and I think we're living under a bit of a dream world. But places like Stalybridge have a great opportunity to be able to say they are, the cycling gateway to the region, and they've also got some great pubs and a really good identity in terms of their town centre. Places like Ashton have a really good selling point to say they're so well connected, really good tram stop, really good shops actually, and a decent market. I think there are different selling points that we've got to big up as a council, but I think, as you say, there are huge structural issues around this that we're doing our best to support and get through at the same time. But it's on our mind, it's in our growth strategy, and it's a really central part of what we see Tameside being in sort of 10 or 20 years time.
Yeah, I mean, if I was having this conversation with you 6 months ago, and I guess those property professionals that you consulted over the Hyde forum and what they do, people would have said things like creating a secondary office market for more people to actually come to work there, to be able to build an office building. I mean, Stockport are doing that with what they're doing around the interchange with 2 great big new office buildings, and that creates a daytime economy for people to go out and grab a few different things and buy a sandwich and all the rest of that. That then creates its own economic activity. But given everyone's working from home, it's just layered on yet another challenge, hasn't it?
It has. It has, and I think it's up to us to try and adapt to that. So, I think the role of the council in this is really important, is that how do we sort of prepare our businesses and our community and our economy and our plans around those things for the future to adapt to a circle like that. Now, I think places like Manchester and places that, have previously been these hubs of great business and industry, when you have something like 40% of people now wanting to work from home after this, are going to have to reassess what they do, and we're going to have to be in the same boat for that. I think there was a question a few years ago around office conversions and flats, and the only show in town was apartments and flats and residential. And I think you're right, now we've got to look at diversity in our town centres. So that may be offices, it may be leisure, it may be how we can offer a sort of wider scheme of things in our town centres to attract more people and to give a unique experience. But that's certainly part of our thinking, I think, as well, in how we adapt to the future economy. What's the digitalisation of places like Ashton and Hyde and Stalybridge, and how do they adapt to make them livable, workable places where you would shop and raise a family at the same time?
Yeah, so moving people to come and actually live in much closer to the different district centres around Tameside, to almost repopulate them. Seems to me that the great difficulty is we never seem to be able to build enough houses, but there's loads of empty shops at the same time, and maybe it's an issue for landowners. What incentives can councils give to landowners, to property owners, to say, you're better off knocking this down and building it for residential, and having a retail offer that suits people who live there, rather than expecting people will come in, because consumer patterns have changed so much.
100%. And I think what we're trying to do is, through our master planning, if you like, of what the future of these town centres look like Hyde and Stalybridge and Ashton, that's a really important part, to say, actually, what would this look like ideally? And there are some really key sites in these places that either still haven't been developed or need to be redeveloped because of what's on them. And I think in places like Stalybridge and Hyde and Ashton, there are bands of people that live around these town centres that wouldn't necessarily go into these town centres. So you're right in that we can build houses and have communities that are very prosperous, but they won't necessarily engage with the town centre in the way that we'd like them to. And I think we've got to find reasons to bring more of those people into our town centres. So if you look at Stockport, they've had that food hall idea recently, which has brought people into the town centre. If you look at Trafford, they've done similar with the market. Bury have got the market. Oldham's got its shopping centres. Everybody has a selling point. And I feel like for our town centres, we've got to make sure that it's not only attracting people from further afield, but it's attracting Tamesiders as well, to make sure that when we say spend local, a really important part of that is to say, actually, spend in your town where you live. And if you need to go to the butchers, there's some great butchers in Ashton. If you need to go for, if you want to go for a meal, go out for a meal in Stalybridge instead of going into Manchester. And I think people need to change the way they think about that. And I think that's part of our job, is to change some of the profile of these towns, so that people say, actually, if they live on the border with Hyde, you might go, actually, let's go into Hyde for a drink instead of going into Manchester and back. We've got to bring people into these town centres and make them more accessible and inclusive places as well.
Okay, we've got a few more minutes. Is there anything that we've not covered so far that in your mind you thought, yeah, we needed to get this message across today? Obviously, Quest are keen to work with you, keen to get you on the radio from time to time, get the council in the newspaper, explaining what it is that the council have got to offer to local people, and also being able to listen to where people are struggling, which might not always be a comfortable experience for you. Yeah. People's perception sometimes is that the council can do a lot more than possibly you can do. There's also an expectation that you're all sat on a massive pot of money, which I think you've addressed today. But the other issue as well, I suppose, is that we're Tameside's part of Greater Manchester. There's supposedly a much more coordinated way of working. I've come across a campaign in the last few weeks called Build Back Better. Yes. To use the opportunities that COVID has presented us with, to actually think about how we can just do things in a better way than we had done before. That maybe we were sleepwalking into, some of the problems that we talked around high streets. So what's the local version of Build Back Better from your perspective, and from when you speak to other colleagues in a similar position to you in other Greater Manchester authorities?
So Build Back Better is really important, and it's not just a sort of title on a Greater Manchester spreadsheet. It's about how we can look at, as you say, as a bit of a wake-up call. How do we look at things like air quality, environmental improvements, ways of working, digitization? How do we look at not only, perhaps people looked at the millennium about what the 21st century would be like, we're now looking what's post-2020 like, and COVID's given us a bit of a chance to, we've all been sat at home, we've all been sort of reassessing where we are, I think, in our lives a little bit. And I think it's given an opportunity for all of us to say, actually, is this the kind of world we want to live in? And if we're building back, it's not only about getting back to normal, because not only do I don't think we'll get back to normal, I don't think necessarily we want to get back to normal in every sense. I think that we want to get back to better and build back better. And so a really central part, I think, about how we look at COVID and our growth perspectives post-COVID is part of that, how we can redevelop not only our infrastructure in our town centres, but how we can change a bit of our culture and a bit of our ways of sort of operating as a community. So it is massively important. But I would like to pick up on that point that you raised about people think the council's sitting on loads of money, because I feel like this is thrown about quite a lot. And there are examples that you'll see on Twitter of somebody saying, well, they've replaced a bollard here, or we've done a bit of pavement there, and what about the cost of this and cost of that and the other? I want to make clear that the council's financial pressure currently next year, as I said earlier, is £48 million worth of revenue. So us kind of perhaps looking at a bollard or a pavement or something else that people necessarily disagree with is not an example of a systemic financial issue at the council. And I totally refute any of that. I refute that we're sat on a pot of money. And actually, I think people need to get behind the council sometimes to say, we're trying to bat for our community so that we're able to do some of this stuff, so that we're able to reinvent our town centres, so that we're able to continue services in adult social care and children's social care, and then continue basic services that people expect, like operations and neighbourhoods. Bins have been a huge part of what we've been doing during COVID as well. And I think sometimes I just want to say to people, do you realize what we're actually up against here? And although you think you're talking to this big, omnipresent, faceless organization, actually, you talk to a group of councillors that have been elected to serve, that have beliefs in good public service and trying to do better for their communities. We're trying our best, and it makes it more difficult, I suppose, when people almost don't want to understand some of that situation that we're in. It's not for our benefit, it's for the benefit of Tameside. And actually, for as long as I do this for, and for as long as other councillors do this for, I think we'll all be in the boat where we say, we did our best, and I hope people would think that at the end of the day. So I wanted to make that point. We're not sat on a big pot of cash, but thanks. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Well, if you're, I think if you wanted a job where you bristled at criticism, you wouldn't have gone into politics. So
no, exactly. You've got to like it to an extent. I mean, I'm more than happy to take people's criticism. I'm more than happy for people to ring me. I mean, people say you're a politician. I elected like community busybody that was complaining about planning applications well before I was elected, and I will continue to do that well after I'm elected. You do it because you care, and I think every councillor's in the same position, but I feel like sometimes people have this picture of councillors that isn't necessarily always true, and especially on the financial side, there's definitely an outdated picture of where people think the council is at. I can't speak for 10 or 15 years ago because I wasn't here, but I think people still think that we're in that position and maybe made some of those decisions that we perhaps did, and I can't defend any of that. But actually what we're doing now is to say we're a different breed, we're a different organisation, we're run by different councillors, and we're doing our absolute best to make sure that not only we survive, but we help Tameside survive as well.
Good. And where's Tameside on the cycling stuff? Because I've seen some criticism of Manchester City Council that they turned some money away from the government, and there's all these lines on a map that show where Tameside have put some cycle lanes in. I mean, some people might not like them, Councillor. Some people might not like the fact that you've coned off parts of roads so people can cycle. But what's the thinking behind trying to introduce more cycling and active, I think you call it active travel?
Active travel. So I think people have to think about how they get about. And I mean, I'm guilty of this. I'm a car driver. And if it means popping to the shop or to the co-op or something else, I'll take the car, even though it's only 5 or 10 minutes away. But I think what we've got to do is think about how we get about. So I've tried to walk more, I've tried to cycle more, I've got a bike now. And I feel like anything that we can do as a council to sort of systemically help some of that, we absolutely should do. So if you look at parts of Germany or parts of the Netherlands, maybe, that we always think of being good at cycling and having a really good cycling city centres, actually some of their infrastructure is only 10 years old in some places, in some other parts of their countries. And what we're saying is, now if we put the infrastructure in now, people can then change their habits around them. So although people say, well, it's only 2 cyclists or whatever using this cycle lane, Number one, we don't know that. Number two, there are quite a lot of cyclists that do use those lanes. I have used them before to go into Manchester when I've had to go to work, or go into Ashton when I've had to go to work. They're really useful. And actually, I think we've got to break this reliance on sort of dominance of the car. And I feel like people think the road is for cars, the pavement is for walkers. So cyclists are sort of in this halfway house of not very comfortable anywhere and being beeped at or yelled at in whichever part of the road they're on. I think we've stuck our head above the parapet a bit and said, actually, we need people to cycle more. People want to cycle more, but the infrastructure is rubbish in some places. So we've got to improve it. And we've carved out a space and actually said, just if we move the cars over a bit, you can still have your space, but get over there. If you move the walkers over a bit, you can still have your space and get over there. This space is going to be for cyclists because we want it to be open to everyone. And I think we've done the right thing in doing that. So I'd like to see more of it, to be honest.
Yeah. What about places for people to safely put their bikes? You need somewhere to lock it up safely as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've tried to bring some more of those into our town centres and some of our buildings that have helped out as well. So any of that infrastructure that we can help with, we are definitely doing. But I think part of the reason is, and it comes back to finance, and you would expect me to say that as the finance exec, is that we need to make sure that we get support from government in doing this and support from Greater Manchester in doing this. So the Manchester issue was quite a perverse one in that we'd put a line, from Ashton into Manchester, which went through Audenshaw, which I realise has caused some issues for some people in terms of different modes of transport or parking areas, but I actually think it's a really good connection. It ended on the Manchester border. I don't think this is going to happen now. I think Manchester have agreed to it, but it would have, in theory, ended on the Manchester border. And then you've had to go another so many miles over the sort of rickety roads into Manchester. And I don't think it was fair or right of them to do that. And I'm glad that there seemed to be a bit of a change of heart in Manchester on that front. But I think we've got to just get used to this kind of new world now, I think, where people do share spaces, and we do want to make sure that everybody's comfortable in every way. And it's not just about, you either get a car or you walk or you get a bus, that's it. Actually, there's a whole range of things that you can use to get about. And actually, the council should facilitate that. Brilliant.
Right. Is there anything else we need to talk about?
I think I've said my piece on the financial.
Yeah. You got your point across there.
Thank you.
So, the message we wanted to get over more than anything is that we are open. That's the hashtag we're using, that we're supporting businesses in Tameside through the Quest network. We're going to be a critical friend of the council. That's an important part. Nigel Skinner, the editor of the paper, will continue to get on your case from time to time. I think you've got to respect that, haven't you?
100%. And Nigel is really good at that, I have to say. I mean, I don't always agree with Nigel, as you would expect. He's a local newspaper editor. Yeah. And I think it's similar with Quest. We don't necessarily always agree. But I think it's important, actually, for the health of democracy in Tameside and the health of Tameside as a whole, that people like me are held to account in that. And I think Quest do that well, even if sometimes I feel uncomfortable, to be honest.
Lovely. Well, hopefully we can continue to have these conversations. That we can come to you, that when things happen, we're often judged by events, aren't we? And it's good of you to give your time up today, Councillor. So thanks very much. Thanks for your support for We Are Open, and I look forward to having many of these conversations in the future.
You too. Thank you very much, Michael.